Now, for more on the manufacturing sector, I'm joined from Shanghai by Simon Lance, Managing Director at Hayes China. Simon, let's start by taking a look at what's happening with this surge that we're seeing with China's manufacturing sector. What's driving that?
Well, there's quite a few drivers in China's manufacturing sector at the moment, and some of them are driving in different directions. From our perspective, we're seeing really strong growth in some of the high-tech sectors and some of the more innovative, higher value products. And in contrast, some of the low-end or low-tech manufacturing disciplines now starting to face some pretty strong cost and profit pressure in China. And we're seeing a general shift west and sometimes out of China to Southeast Asia. So depending on the sector in the manufacturing industry, there are either some bright options ahead or some challenges.
Now let's look at some of the shifts. We know that 2 years ago, China announced its Made in China 2025 plan to really increase the value of manufacturing higher up the value chain. So given that then, what is China doing to prepare for, as you mentioned, losing some of these low-end manufacturers?
It's a really complex question, and I don't think there's one simple answer for it, but you can see in different provinces around China, the manufacturers there are either finding the shift to higher end, higher tech products and industries easier or more difficult, depending on some of the policies and certainly some of the labor force that's available. So here in eastern China, in Shanghai and Jiangsu province, we've seen a fairly rapid shift towards the high end and looking at industries like medical devices or light consumer technology. We've seen the eastern regions pick that up quite quickly. If you look in the northeast, where some of the heavy industry in chemicals or heavy machinery, it's taking a little bit longer to transition to some of the newer growth industries.
Now let's look at some of the expenses involved. We're seeing rising logistic, land and labor costs in China. How is that affecting the manufacturing sector?
It's having a strong impact, and if we go back to the 12th five-year plan for China, some of the human resource targets that were included in that plan have really been largely achieved, and one of those targets in particular was to increase the minimum wage year on year, and for some of the low-end manufacturing industries that now has increased the cost of labour to the point where they really need to consider the efficiency and productivity of their workforce overall. So for those particular industries, we're seeing companies that are moving towards automated or heavily automated factories and plants still remaining viable, but certainly China as a low-cost labour destination is no longer really applicable. The industries here that are doing well are higher value and higher tech.
So given that the industry is changing, what do you expect that to do in terms of the global manufacturing chain then overall?
Well, China still has a really strong competitive advantage globally, I believe, when it comes to the industrial supply chain, and you can see some quite inspirational long-term plans and visions like the Belt and Road. And the amount of investment and infrastructure to support that long-term vision is really opening up new markets for some of China's manufacturing companies. So I believe China's position on the global stage and its access both to its own domestic market and some of the neighbouring markets really make it still the leader globally when it comes to the manufacturing industries. There'll certainly be challenges ahead in coping with rising labour costs and many other challenges, but I think China really is positioned quite well on the global stage to move to that next level.
Now, Simon, in the US, we know that the Trump administration is really determined to attract manufacturers back to the country. It may be a tough sell. So what is China's competitive advantage over other countries?
Well, China, and certainly for our clients here, you know, they're really interested in the domestic market and the access to neighbouring markets. So while there may be some industries leaving China, whether that's to economies in Southeast Asia or back to America, I think most of the companies that are here now are here in China for China first, and the access and the success in the domestic market is a key priority in their business planning. Next, they really look at the neighbouring markets in Asia, and then obviously out to global. But you know, I don't think that's really going to have a large impact on the strategic decisions of manufacturers in China. It's certainly a concern or a question that needs to be looked at, but generally I think it's the domestic market and the access to neighbouring markets in Asia and Europe that tend to drive those decisions.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, Simon Lance, Managing Director at Hayes China.